Hey there, John Morris here, johnmorrisonline.com. This lesson, we're going to be talking about how to create a professional, engaging looking photo for your profile. Now, it could be easy to kind of brush this off, but I want to kind of start out by driving home why this is important, because it's not going to completely sell you and get you hired, but in a competitive arena like Upwork and some of these other freelance sites, it's small things like this that can make a difference. So I've just done a search over here on WordPress. It's kind of a standard search that any client might do over here on Upwork. And I want you to just take a minute. Let me scroll down here a little bit. Just take a minute and look at the images that you can see here. And just look at each one and kind of get your first impression of each one. And I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at each one of those. Now, if you're like me, and I would say probably most people, each picture you looked at, you got kind of an initial impression. And if you think about the question of kind of professionalism, which one looks the most professional, you kind of got an idea of that right off the bat. So, for example, the two that really stand out to me in terms of looking professionally done are the one from Kristen C. and Muhammad. I would guess, I'm taking a stab here, but you're probably, if you were asking yourself that question, probably something similar. If you really look at Pablo, Muhammad up here, Ilya, and Anthony, all of these, Ilya's kind of in between, not 100% sure, it's kind of too far away to really know, but Anthony, Muhammad, and Pablo all don't give me that aura of professionalism. Now, I'm not trying to rag on these people too much or anything, but I do want you to see the difference between the two, because one of these kind of lends that air of credibility and authority, and then others of these don't. Now, again, you may not think that matters all that much, but when someone does a search like this and they're looking through, I mean, how many pages are here? There's probably hundreds of pages, thousands of different developers. When you're looking through that and you're trying to decide on one of these, all the little things matter. So again, a professional looking image isn't going to completely sell a client on you, but it could be the difference between them clicking this post job to invite button or not, okay, or them inviting you to their project or not. I don't have one created, so that's why it says post job to invite, but normally this would say like invite. That could be the difference between them inviting you or not to their job. And so we want to stack all of that in our favor so that we can get that click and that click through. And one of the first things, people are just visual. One of the first things they're going to look at is this image over here on the left. And they're going to get, people do this all the time. We talk about don't judge a book by its cover. Yet that's what we do all the time. And so they're going to get a read of you just by your picture. And so we just want to stack that in our favor. All right, so with that said, how do we do this? Well, the kind of framework, the approach I take was actually not something I came up with. I was told this by somebody, and it wasn't easy to hear at the time, but they had a point. I went through and looked at my stuff, and sure enough, it seemed like I needed to make an update. And so they kind of gave me what they had been told from their mentor. They kind of passed that on to me. And so it's worked well for them, and I've done it now. It's worked well for me. And essentially the idea is you just want a nice shirt, a nice background, and a nice smile. And so we're going to talk about those things kind of a little bit more in detail. And as we do, we're going to be looking at, I've come over here to Pinterest and I just pulled up some headshots. These are professionally done headshots. And so we're going to take a look at some of these and some of the ideas that we want to talk about, and you can see some of this stuff at work. All right, so let's talk about a nice shirt. So the first thing is you generally want to stick with solid colors and avoid patterns. And if you look at most of these headshots that you're going to see here, you're going to see most of these, I mean, this is semi-solid. I mean, it's pretty solid color. solid color, solid color, solid color, solid color, solid color. I mean, there's one pattern here, but it's not like a overbearing pattern. This one here, that maybe fits a little bit more with her personality. I'm not sure, but that's a little patterny. But most of these are solid colors. Right? If we scroll down, we've got one pattern here, but if you actually look at that, the way it kind of looks on the screen, it is a little distracting. Okay, so that's really what you want to avoid, is having your shirt or whatever be distracting. Here's a really good example of why patterns and stuff, you can see just how, like when you look at this photo, it's just kind of distracting and the lines get jagged and it almost makes it look wrinkled in a sense. So again, you want to try to stick to solid colors, and you want to stick to and you want to avoid patterns. You also don't want to go with anything kind of too bright or overbearing. I think if you look at all these, a lot of these are just black and white, or they're like a dark blue. This one is kind of a more muted blue. Really, there's only a couple here that, I mean, this is a brighter blue, but it is a solid color. But you know, it seems to work okay. This one's a bright red down here. But you look at all these professional headshots, and again, these are professional photographers. A lot of these people are probably actors, actresses, famous business people, reporters, that sort of thing. So these are probably a lot of money went into these photos. And if you look at the majority of them, what you're getting is solid colors, no patterns, nothing too bold or too glaring in terms of color, and so forth. Also, just some simple stuff, like you don't want it to be wrinkled, of course. You don't want it to bunch up when you sit down or that sort of thing. If you're a guy and you're going to be wearing a tie, then you want to make sure that the color of the tie, again, is not any sort of bold or glaring color. You want to make sure it's kind of between the color of the suit and the shirt. So, for example, if the suit, like this one over here, if the suit is black and the shirt is white, then you want to go with kind of a shade in between that, maybe some sort of gray or something like that. So depending on what color suit you wear, that could work. This one here, actually, this works pretty well. You have a kind of a dark blue suit. You have a tie that matches that same color. Has a little bit of pattern to it, but it's not too bad to where it's completely overbearing. Here's another interesting example, although not something I'd recommend because you don't see his face, but you can kind of see how the shirt ties in with the little pocket scarf thing or pocket handkerchief and the shoes here. So that's pretty nice if you could include the face there. But again, keep the colors simple. The thing about it is you can go for really bold and try to make a statement if you know what you're doing. But if you're not a professional photographer and that sort of thing, you are taking a risk in doing that, and so there's a good chance that you could miss. And in this context, it's not going to help you all that much to try and go and do something bold that really stands out. You're not going to get so much advantage from it that it's worth it. Whereas if you don't get kind of just the fundamentals down here, it can actually hurt you. So it's better to just go simple and plain and make sure that you're not creating an impression that's working against you. Again, if you're a guy and there's no tie, then avoid a white shirt, right? If you're not wearing a coat or anything like that, even for women, you probably want to avoid all white, because that can kind of tend to, what happens is, especially if you start messing with the color balance afterwards, the details in the white can very easily just get blurred out. And so now it just looks kind of like this white wall. So just be a little bit careful of that. Right? And try to avoid shiny sort of things as well, because again, on the camera, that sort of thing, if you don't get it just right, can really start to blow out in the processing on the back end and so forth. All right, so that's kind of probably more detail than you ever wanted around wearing a shirt, but those are some simple things that you can do to make sure that your headshot looks professional. In terms of a background, again, a a solid color generally. You can do an environmental shot. You'll see some of these are environmental. But if you're doing a solid color, you want to have something that, generally you want to have something that contrasts well with whatever sort of shirt or jacket you happen to be wearing. So a really good example is this right here. You have a nice kind of darker background here. You have a white kind of coat here, and that creates a real nice contrast between the two. It really helps her to stand out away from the background, and that's kind of what you're looking for. Now, you'll notice some of these, like this one is really neat. She has darker hair, and then it is a darker background, and so it almost kind of blends in a little bit and creates a kind of nice effect. But again, this is a professional photographer doing this, so that's an effect that they probably really worked on. There's a lot of stuff that goes into these sort of shoots that look simple, but there's a ton that goes into them. So they probably really worked on that to get that effect. So you want to be a little bit careful of that if you're not a professional photographer. Generally, something like this is going to be a little bit better. Okay, so again, you see there are people, again, she has darker hair and the darker background with a darker coat. It works here because they've kind of set it up to work and really went into it. But you'll see here, solid color, lighter shirt, a little bit darker color in the background, creates a nice contrast between the subject and the background. So again, for solid colors, a solid color background, you want to have something that contrasts well with the person and what they're wearing. For environmental, you'll see some of these against these brick walls and on couches and these sort of things. The thing you want to do here is make sure it fits well with what you're doing, right? So if you're a web developer, make it something a little techie. Like, for example, this here would probably be pretty good because you have your computer in here, your little notes. It kind of works well with you being a freelancer. So something like this might work. Whereas against a brick wall like this, and I know she's probably not a freelancer, I get that, but against a brick wall like this for a web developer, probably, I mean, it's not like it's some huge thing, but it doesn't really fit with what you're doing and probably who you are. Like, how often do you stand against brick walls like that, right? Compared to how often are you at your computer? So you just want to make it fit with who you are and what you're doing, okay? Whatever you happen to be freelancing at. A really good source for backgrounds, if you're like, okay, I've got, I'm doing this in my house, I don't have a good wall that I can do this against, or if I do, it just looks weird doing it against a wall. One really neat source is Backdrops Outlet, or backdropoutlet.com. Not an affiliate or anything for this. This is just happens to be what I actually use. My podcast background for my YouTube channel for a while was a backdrop that I got from here. But you can see they have all these really cool backdrops that you can use. They have all these wood ones here. You can go to all sorts of different ones. So you have the abstract. You have these abstract backgrounds. I mean, these maybe aren't necessarily the greatest for headshots. Bokeh. Yeah, so there's all sorts of stuff here. Again, maybe not the greatest. Let's just go to wood, I guess. But you could come through here and find some backgrounds that could work for what you're doing. And these are, they're pretty cheap. $39 isn't too bad. And the way they work, if we just kind of click through to one here, is you can kind of get several different kinds. So they have their baby drops. They have these titanium cloths, platinum cloth. They have these candy floors. The one I got was what they call a stick. So basically, it was like vinyl. It was, and the pattern was printed on the vinyl, and the back of it was sticky. So I literally just stuck it against my wall where I record, and that was my backdrop. So these are really handy. Could be a good source for you to get a nice looking background that you can then take your picture with. All right, last one. Then we did a nice shirt, a nice background, now a nice smile. And this can probably be the most personal one. I personally, so you know that I get it. If that's you, I've got a crooked smile. You may have noticed that if you've seen any of my pictures. My parents when I was young didn't have the money to afford me getting braces, and as an adult, it's just something I've lived with and never really did much about. But it is one of those things that for me, I could be a little insecure about. But even in my pictures, I've learned that even with a crooked smile, that smiling is better than not smiling generally, unless you have a good kind of mouth smile like this. Like, this is a good mouth smile that works, right? But for a lot of people, when they try and do this, it doesn't come out really well. As a matter of fact, I would say if we go back to the very first kind of page here with this, right? A lot of these mouth smiles, they look kind of more like smirks. That almost looks angry. This is a good, if we look at her picture, that's a good teeth smile, right? And I know we're getting into details here, but I just want to give you everything that more than what you might need to make a good headshot here. This almost looks kind of like a frown. That one it's hard to tell, but this looks a little off. That one's not so bad. Maybe a little grumpy here, but not too bad. But generally speaking, if you look at, say, this one, and I think this one a little bit too, he's getting there. But if you look at this one compared to the rest of these, this looks like a real smile. Looks like an inviting person. And so, again, you just want to try to have a nice smile. Try to show teeth if you can. And I mean, if that's something that with me you're insecure about, I drink a lot of coffee, so I have to, to keep my teeth from just going completely dark, I have to whiten my teeth kind of regularly. If that's not something you do, go ahead and start now. A few weeks before you're going to do your shot for your headshot, and start working on that. Also, don't be afraid to Photoshop your picture. Matter of fact, if I go over to my get on my freelancer account, and we go to my profile, and we click on my picture, you can see, like, when it's up this close, it's pretty obvious I photoshopped that, right? But when you're back here like this, it's maybe not so obvious, and that's the way they're gonna pretty much look at it. Okay, so don't be afraid to go in and Photoshop that afterwards. All right, just some kind of side notes on the side of this, outside of the nice smile, nice background, nice shirt. Another thing that you can look at is creating some visual interest. One of the things is what we already talked about with these disappearing backgrounds. You can maybe play with that and make that work. But another thing here is the angle, right? This isn't just a straight on shot. And this isn't, she's kind of tilted to the side here. She's kind of tilted. This is a little bit more straight on. This is a little bit more straight on. And that works in these cases. And that's, that's completely fine. But you'll see this one kind of tilted to the side, kind of tilted leaning against the wall, tilted to the side here. The reason they're doing that is they're trying to create angles to create visual interest. If you just do a straight on shot, right, it can be difficult to make it to have any sort of visual appeal or visual interest because it's just a straight on shot. So play with the angles a little bit. If you're taking a front on shot and it just doesn't feel quite right, try moving the camera or yourself at a little bit of an angle and playing around with that. And when you do this, don't just take one picture. Take 100 pictures and go through them and find which one just pops out to you. Okay. And then maybe show it to a few people, or maybe gather like the best 5 and show them to your friends and family and be like, hey, which one to you looks the most professional, stands out to the most to you, makes you, this would be someone that you would want to work with or maybe hire to do something for you, and get people's opinions and, trust those opinions if those are people you trust, because a lot of times they can give you a perspective outside of what you kind of think. So don't be afraid to play around with that visual interest and get insight from other people and so forth. All right, so that's everything you never wanted to know about how to take a good headshot. Hopefully that gives you more than you need to go out and take a professional looking image. And again, I know this can seem like a small thing, but it's probably the very first thing that people are going to see about you. and you don't get a second chance to make a first impression, that cliche line, but it's very, very true, and you want to stack everything that you can in your favor in that first initial impression to get someone to want to look at your profile and invite you to their job. And this is one of the simple things that you can do to do that. All right, that'll do it for this lesson. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.